This is Musée de l'Arles Antique Museum. Interesting, it had the potential of being an interesting looking building, but it comes out looking rather sterile, cold, unfinished on landscape. Fortunately, they let you use video here, so we'll have many magnificent things to look at. You can see the effects of using this soft limestone. It wears away quickly. Just a close-up of a lion artifact from who knows where. This is a diagram model of the earliest of discovered tombs in a series of tunnels, and these are artifacts that give evidence of apparently the Neolithic period. Maytat. It's interesting to make this connection between the fine arrowhead points and the pottery, which looks like it has some neat affectations, just simply because I'd never connected those two skills in any way in my mind. This part of the museum deals with the proto-history, which is 600 BC. These columns, if that's what they are, seem to have very primitive types of etchings into the stone, things that are very primitive allusions to. I'm assuming this is a horned animal of some sort, because these look like horns right here, although it look like three of them, so I don't know. Also could be horse. It certainly looks like cave art type thing, but presumably these were stone devices perhaps used in the burials. This museum does not rise to the level of the museum at l'Élysée in the way of explaining anything. You can generally make out something here, but the simple little side graphics that they drew illustrating what you were looking at was very, very, very useful. This has a very interesting allusion, of course, to the Pueblo Indians of Arizona and the Anasazi. The only obvious difference that I see is access was from doors rather than through the top of the rooms. And there are no kivas, of course. These are columns that existed 2 centuries before Christ through the 1st century after Christ. This last one seems interesting because of the curves. This side curve is concave, the other side looks like it's, I don't know what you call it, curves in at the bottom and then arches towards, so the whole column is skewed towards the right here. This is some kind of funeral inscription from the 1st and 2nd century. It looks like it's made out of a harder marble. This shows Arles in the 1st century and the critical Roman artifacts. And then here in the 2nd century, you can see that the amphitheater was apparently added, if I'm reading this correctly. And then in the 4th century, the Termes and the Forum, and the Group Episcopal, whatever that is. And then in the 5th century, I don't know. This is an interesting drawing of Arles, showing the amphitheater and the theater, showing a chunk of the wall, which perhaps was left from earlier days. Some kind of bridge to the right there. And that looks like a circus up at the top. Ben-Hur type circus. The masses will be entertained. We'll do a little helicopter view of this. I wonder if that theater had those backdrops permanent or whether they were just props put into this drawing. Another interesting little model of Arles in its heyday. You can see the wall now all the way around. Well, almost all the way around. Oh, notice the two main gates were like double towers. This is a model of the Forum and of the Cryptoporticous of the epic. This was apparently of the 5th and 6th century. And we'll look at some of the fragments of the columns that were used. Just a moment. The columns we'll look at are columns from right here, right off this main entrance. So I'll give you an idea of the size. What's amazing to me is how they handled and worked such huge pieces of stone. I'd estimate those to be almost 2 feet across. Some of the detail on some other architectural construction. These are only about 8 inches wide, what you're looking at now. They're done in looks like a marble. I'll pan through this area and then hope to make some sense of it, or at least see things that are interesting. And I'll begin to the right and go to the left. And here's another close-up of the theater in a model form, which is pretty to see. perhaps their theater productions were all standard. I mean, like Nutcracker Suite, where everything is the same. The only thing that may change are the dance choreographies, but otherwise everything else can remain the same. Or in the, I think it's the Hindu of Indonesia and India, that have two main stories within their religion that are told all the time in different ways, but they're identical stories. I mean, the two stories are done identically each time. It always amazes me to how an artist can render something so lifelike in a different size. About all I can do, since I don't read French that well, is to take pictures of things that look interesting. This may have been a funeral monument. It's interesting to see the musculature. I wonder how much of this skill changed with Da Vinci's probing of the anatomies by surgery. Again, how the same skill is used on a flat surface. This probably illustrating the complexity and yet the natural flowing of those materials between the two legs and the bust of a young prince. God, the difference between wealth and lack of it. These are the views I'm always trying to get from the ground. Now I'm a little bit closer. But imagine the amount of work that it would take to create each of these things. Precisely. This looks like a model describing some repairs or some construction on the arena, and you'll notice that it was designed to be covered, either for year-round or to block the sun in the summer. They show it for bullfights. I'm sure it's designed to represent gladiator type things. This is a depiction of the chase. There, a boar and dogs are biting at it. And here the stag, someone's jumping on the back of it. The dogs are biting at it. And here a net being used to trap something, kind of an animal. Not sure what it is. Big ropes, if you think about it. This appears to illustrate that an initial piece of stone was carved, the part in the back with the thin lines, the design was etched on it, as you see here. And then, somehow after that, the relief was created or carved. Or maybe this is just illustrating that when a piece is lost, I think that's what it is. When a piece is lost of something, they have just put in a false piece and etched in the continuation of the design. That makes more sense. And this is apparently dealing with the economy, some kind of fruit being taken from the tree and then put in baskets. People worked naked in those days and then hauled somehow, I guess. This is a lintel from a funeral, probably a tombstone type of house. What the symbols meant, I don't know. They might have been tools like this one here. Yeah, maybe some kind of plumb bob in there, a hammer or hatchet. These look like factory raw material stuff. Like chunks over there made smaller, then ultimately made into these, whatever they are here, pins, or in this instance needles, maybe an awl. Maybe this shows somewhat the manufacturing process. Interesting double sewing needle, unless they had two holes to hold the thread rather than just a free slot. It's no wonder that people who have the skill to make things like this and the needles we looked at a few moments ago are assaulted when they envision these things being done in a mass-produced way. And these, I'm guessing, were some kind of either wheels, literally, or grinding stones. I'm not sure which. I'm guessing they may have been wheels. And this is a drawing of the baths, apparently. Water funneled down through here, and inside were the baths, I guess. The water exited out there. Or maybe these were manufacturing places, and that was the power, come to think of it. Came from those water wheels. Yeah, that would make sense. So this was some kind of a manufacturing process powered by water. Yeah, the water flowed in through here, fed along the pipes, turned that water wheel there, and then flowed down through the system left and right to power the others. Very clever. Looks like a system for hauling material around on some kind of what we would call a true production line, but something akin to that. And that's where those wheels were used for some purpose. Whether it was stone grinding, whether it was corn grinding, it looks like it would be grinding of something. From the bags that we see over here. Gets a clearer picture when I look at the whole thing. Water coming down through there, turning that power wheel. If you think of it this amphor, excuse me. That's the way Greeks transmitted, ported wine and so forth, and their ancient ships. And then here the Roman water pipes. I've often wondered what these looked like. They're made of lead. Look how big they are. Imagine how heavy they are. And they were bulbed so that one end would fit into the other, notched so they would align correctly. You can imagine this is pretty much analogous to what we use today. We use smaller water pipes. Here's where it would have connected somehow. And with lead, it would have been possible to, relatively easy with heat, mold these end pieces, maybe so they were watertight. Man, slaves had a lot of work to do just hauling this stuff around. This indicates the aqueduct paths bringing water to Arles. These seem to be the remains of a baby. And that was the way that the child was interred. This apparently deals with medical issues and some of the tools, I guess, but this shows a fracture in a bone. Whether it's trying to illustrate, I don't speak the language, whether it's trying to illustrate repairs or not, I don't know. There's a fracture there and there's a fracture here. Or maybe it's just trying to show that this was the result of the fracture. There's a deformation. Seems to be in the middle of a major bone. Other fractures indicated here. This just seems to represent household items, a mirror, probably a cosmetics box. The same thing with those little tins. Maybe some kind of hair brooch there. What's fascinating is to realize that one or more human beings used and prized these items, never dreaming for a minute that they would be on display thousands of years later. Very pretty, these rings. These might have been used to hold a tunic in place. This apparently represents a carving of a man's daughter and sons that might have been used in the construction of his villa. Imagine being able to do portraits in stone. Even with the terrible environmental destruction to the face, you can get a sense of the temperament or the emotion or whatever on the man's face. And this woman's casual, fluid movement, you can see her right knee is up, indicating that she's moving forward, and her weight in the stomach area is projected forward a bit, like a dancer. And yet her arms seem to be very casual and holding on, just more of an affectation than anything else to her, part of her garment. So that's where the top of that little house in that cemetery went. This is interesting to a layman because it's a human form with a snake coiled around it, and in between the snake's coils are representations of it looks like a bull, a couple of people, maybe a lion, maybe a crab. I don't know what this was, but it's obviously dirty. It talks about sex up in the upper left-hand corner. And as we move across, it says errati, which I assume is Latin for erotic. Various forms of the amphor, used for transporting materials. I always wondered where the benefit was in having the narrow bottom. would appear to make it incredibly unstable. Of course, this one epitomizes that. Maybe why it's broken, but it sits on a point. Was it to get it away from destructive elements like water in the bottom of a bilge of a boat? I don't know. This section deals with navigation, and this may just be illustrating a carving of two men preparing to lift a bale of something on board ship. Here's a diagram of the bridge, a floating pontoon bridge. Interesting. Huh. Notice how it was held in position by these upstream pillars. Notice the holes in the sarcophagi for drainage, whether it was bodily fluids or what, I don't know. But a pretty sizable box to stick somebody in when they couldn't possibly be half, even a third as much of the volume. What if they described the laps that had been run? These were freezes in some part of the curved portion of the circus. Look at these men almost totally outside of his chariot. I wonder if each artisan was given a specific theme and told to come up with his own idea, or whether it was detailed by others. They just followed drawings. This room is just filled with necrolytic things, a sarcophagus, and so we'll just wander down and look for the things that seem very interesting. Imagine how elaborate, what the cost of producing this was. What story it had to say that the man had no doubt defined, or the woman, to the sculpture before it was done. Perhaps he was a hunter, because this shows a hunting scene. Heavily worn, so maybe this one was somehow subjected to the weather. But there someone is throwing a steer into what looks like it may be a wolf. And the dog's tearing at the wolf. Another dog there. This may have been a depiction of the man. To paraphrase Woody Allen, I don't care about death or immortality. I just don't want to die. And after I'm dead, I could care less about anything I'm thinking. All of the stones here are tombstones, stones from tombstones that reflected the passing of someone. And the question you have to ask as you wander down through here is, will all of this sometime, and all of what we do except for cremation and throwing ashes to the wind, appear to be a foolish waste of food, a la Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein, and even the allusion to that concept of reusing and recycling our bodies when we're dead, directly on the food table in Last Man, First Man. Were these scenes that were from that man's life that he somehow felt would be understood by the future? Were these his friends? Does each person reflect a close friend? No doubt there are messages hidden in here that are hidden from our view, at least mine. Here a battle scene. Maybe the man was a great warrior. But if you commission your own works, isn't that like the warping of history by those who write it? These certainly look like wonderful works of terrazzo. Take those thin little pieces. But I suppose to a person who's the artist of terrazzo, this is just one more skill. But what an elegant way to cover a cement floor. And what would have caused that burning? Was it something long, long after the time that it was actually used after its inception? These are larger tiles, look more simplistic, perhaps they're much older. The tiles are breaking down over there, as you see. And really simple in their graphic design. Like something like this, which is truly an art piece of artwork, to do all that out of little chunks of stone. And look at the grace of design in the lines. It's curious to see this lack of symmetry. But apparently that perhaps was the way the bowl was made, or the artist felt like doing it that way. It would certainly seem that they had the skill to do it whatever way they chose. Because in contrast, the appearance of these helix turns or helix ropes would appear to suggest they had to be very precise in the way they laid that out in order to have it come out correctly. Now this military scene that we looked at from a distance may illustrate that the hero, perhaps this man here, I don't know, somewhere in here there's a hero, and it looks maybe like his adversary has been trampled. See the horse's head lying down, his neck going up to his body, and perhaps the chariot upturned. Perhaps that's his shield jammed in there. And this horse just about down, this horse totally upended. And this may reflect the people who were saved by this effort. And that's my story. Some obeisance. One of the things you get from looking at these things closely and I'll see more when I actually do my video because I look at them 10 or 15 times, is the little snippets of life that they portray. Notice that the man to the right is wearing some kind of a short garment, whereas the man to the left seems to be wearing much longer ones. What does that indicate? Was this mom and dad? And the rest were the family? Perhaps the three boys playing in a boat, a little sailboat with a rudder on the side. Is this a monster consuming all of the human up to the waist? The traditional snake? Were these offerings? Is this a slave with his arms tied behind his back? And some produce or products, wine perhaps, being offered to this man? Or back to the snake again? Better snake. This belt buckle belongs to the Bishop of Caesarius of Arles. His ivory belt buckle. He lived about 536 AD. It's interesting to think of a man who wore this buckle 1,500 years ago. How he thought of it as his, took it for granted, used it every day or whenever. It's just a little bit of him. And here it is, memorialized for as long as this museum can stand. Donation for a household.